tam vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga samnitam sanishchayena yuktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa. We all want to be happy, but do we really want to be happy? Because for most of us, the way that we act actually is much more self-sabotaging than actually working towards what we really want. Or do we even know what we really want? I think that as we unpack today's topic, we'll realize that this question is actually way more difficult than it seems. It's not as simple as like, I know what I want and I'm going to go and do it and then my life will be complete. Is that what your life is like? It's not what my life is like. Somehow it gets in a big mess and entanglement of confusion, and life feels like suffering a lot of the time. And this is exactly what all of the yoga tradition and the Buddhist tradition is trying to deal with, is the fact that life doesn't feel good, but we want it to. So what can we do to change that? So it's funny that even when we think we're working towards our own happiness or we're doing things to try and make things better, sometimes we actually even make things worse in the large picture. And this like dilemma of like working against your own interests, or, you know, you've heard the phrase, get out of your own way. Well, like we're in our own way all the time. And this dilemma is exactly what is the topic of the Bhagavad Gita. This is the war within. The fact that, like, as I read it described in one yoga text, the top half of our body is going in one direction and the bottom half of our body is going in the other direction. We're just not in alignment. And that's what this practice of yoga is all about. You've heard about yoga alignment. It might be your knee stacking over your ankle or something else like that. But actually, it's more like bringing your mind, your body, your heart, and your values and your actions and your words into alignment. That is a lot more practical, a lot more meaningful, and a lot more useful in the long run in terms of life. Yeah. So yoga is ultimately about overcoming suffering. And for many of us, it can start with like overcoming the suffering of a low back ache, you know, or like anxiety or some other, you know, daily life ailment. But those things, as we know, are like usually a symptom of a larger picture, a larger problem. And the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the kind of classic definitions of what yoga actually is this verse, which is basically, you've heard me talk about it before, this verse that I'm kind of working with a lot recently, which goes like this. Let it be known that the unlinking of the union with suffering is known as yoga. This yoga is to be practiced with confident determination and an enthusiastic heart. So yoga is the unlinking, the viyoga, which is, we talked before about, does yoga mean union? So in this context, yoga means the disunion from the attachment to suffering. And I like to think of it as like letting go of holding on to your pain. And that's one way of understanding it. I'm going to break it down into like 3 different aspects that kind of this notion of unlinking from suffering unpacks into. Basically, there's the fact that we actively hold on to pain, and there's active things that we can do about this. And then there's like more subconscious things that's going on for us that we maybe aren't aware that we're actually doing. Because yoga is a very subtle and sophisticated psychological system that understands that what we do and what we say and what we want are sometimes not totally conscious behaviors. And whenever something is unconscious or habitual, it means that we are not free, because it means that we can't use our agency to actually change what we're doing in our life. So in that respect, yoga is about achieving freedom. And it doesn't mean leaving behind the world. This is the whole thing about the Bhagavad Gita, is that you're not trying to leave behind your life. You're trying to be free in your life. And freedom means doing the stuff that you want. And that means bringing your values and your actions into alignment. So how do we do that? Well, let's have a look at how we hold on to pain. so that we can understand, so the unconscious and conscious ways that we hold on to pain, so that we can understand how to stop doing that. So you might think, what do you mean hold on to pain? I don't hold on to pain. I'm afraid like most of us basically do. And there's a few reasons why you might do that. First of all, for many of us, it can be like a badge of honor. Like, I went through this thing and it was so hard and look at me, I did it and now I'm fine. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're good. Good for you. You did that. I mean, I do the same thing. But the thing is that when we hold on to that, when we kind of carry the past pain around on our backs like that, it's like it's a chip on our shoulder. It's something that we have to bear the load of that memory. It affects what we do next. And I'm not saying we totally disregard the past, but it's just that we can maybe have a lighter attitude to the past things that happened to us, because the yoga system understands that past pain affects the decisions we make in the future. So if you were hurt by a certain type of person in the past, that might mean that in the future you might be biased against that type of person, having a relationship with that kind of person, or even just having a civil interaction with that kind of person, which is a bit unfair for them and also for you. So it's not good to kind of hold on to something with a lot of emotion. It's not good to clutch on to the pain as if it were a comfort, because it isn't really a comfort. It's something that, you know, embitters and spoils our view of the world, tinges it with distaste and kind of, you know, resentment. Yeah. The thing is also, it's a question of pride, isn't it? It's like, I did this, I overcame this, and look at me. And so in the yoga tradition, there's this idea of Asmita, which is sometimes translated as ego. And I'm going to talk more about Asmita and the other four kleshas from Patanjali's yoga, which are basically things that hold us back. Right? So Asmita is this false sense of self. I like to think of it as like the stories or like the image of yourself that you have in your mind, which is not necessarily the same as who you actually are. So you have this image of yourself as like, you know, a sufferer. And the more you think of yourself as a sufferer, the more you're going to suffer. It's like people who are fixers always find problems. So I used to be a fixer. I'm trying not to be a fixer now. A problem solver, you know. So suddenly my life would be full of problems all over the place, and I was like, what's up with that? And when I started to try and let go of that, I started to find there were fewer problems to deal with. So that's the thing about Asmita. So when you carry around your pain, it attracts more pain, basically. So the second thing is, again, it's related to these kleshas, which is kind of, there are 5 hindrances which kind of hold you back, as I said. So we've got the attachment to pleasure, raga, and we've got the aversion from pain, dvesha. And I'll unpack all these literally next week in my next video. But what we have is holding on to what's familiar and allowing yourself to get annoyed. Is that you know, this is what I was trying to practice earlier in the spring when I first came across this verse. I was like, you know, I can have an argument with someone and I can hold on to the annoyance, or I can allow myself to get annoyed about something trivial or maybe even not trivial, or I can choose the high road. I can choose not to have that emotion because actually it doesn't do anything good for me. And it's almost like again, it's maybe Asmita actually, is that you think that if I'm going to get annoyed at them, then that's me like defending my values. But it's not actually, it's just you putting yourself in a box of annoyance. Now, the third thing, and this is the big one, and this is the really unconscious one, and this is the really, it's the big picture one. So in the Buddhist tradition, they have this idea of 2 darts or 2 arrows, which is that pain always comes in 2 waves. So you've got, when you stub your toe, for example, you've got the pain of your toe making contact with the door or your sofa leg or whatever, and then you've got the pain of the anger and the frustration and the annoyance that comes with it. So, or, I could trip up on a toy that my daughter leaves on the floor, and then I could get annoyed. I was like, why is this not tidied up? I could get annoyed at myself or someone else who didn't tidy it or pick it up from the floor, and that aggressive and conflicting, emotion is the second dart. And that often is what causes more pain than the first thing. Because just stubbing your toe, you could easily forget it. But then if you get annoyed at someone, then you're going to carry that around with you, like I mentioned in point number 1. Similarly, they talk about the 2 darts in questions of like addiction. So people who suffer with addiction, which is a disease like anything else, it's the second dart that is causing the problem, because addiction is usually the symptom of another lack. Like there's a hole that is needing to be filled, an emotional hole or another kind of hole because of some important need that it's not being met. And so in order to try and deal with that, as a response to that, the addiction kind of arises to fill that hole. And then the addiction spawns all these other problems like, crime and other conflicts and things like that. So the reason I'm talking about this is that we tend to respond to the second dart as opposed to the first dart. So if you think of it like this, if you're feeling sad, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to eat chocolate. And if you eat chocolate, that is like a nice temporary, mitigation of that sadness, or it's a nice temporary comfort. But the nature of things that give pleasure to your senses is that they are necessarily finite in their effect. The taste of the chocolate will fade from your tongue. The effect of the sugar in your bloodstream will be diluted, over time. And so ultimately, the pleasure that you get from this chocolate is going to be fleeting. And so at the end of that, you're going to get a new sensation, which is needing more chocolate or something else, right? And so this is what they call creating the binding influence of action, karma bandhana, is that you do something to try and, because you have desire or you have a sense of lack, which, by the way, I never even said this word dukkha, which is how we translate as suffering. One of my favorite teachers, Michael Stone, he translates dukkha as lack. So you have a sense of like not having enough, like something is not, you're not satisfied by life, you're not satisfied by yourself, you're not satisfied by your situation, so you try to fill it with something. So it can be chocolate, it can be alcohol, it can be other drugs, it can be buying something, it can be looking at your phone, it can be going out to try and seek other people in your life to try and fill the emotional hole that you have, but these things are necessarily temporary. And, you can have a lovely, rich life full of beautiful sensory experiences, but if you're using that to try and fill the hole of, and I'm getting to what the main core problem is that basically you're unable to connect to yourself. And I mean that in 2 senses of the word. You're unable to connect to yourself, like the you, like me. I can't connect to who is Emma and like my experience of myself and what my needs are and what my true wishes and desires are. And also like knowing my own habits and my own personality and characteristics. If I'm not connected to me, everything else is going to be much more challenging, and I'm not going to know how to act skillfully. And more than that, you're not able to connect to yourself with a capital S. So in the yoga tradition, it's the Artman. In the Upanishads, and of course in the Bhagavad Gita, it's referred to as the Artman. I like to think of it as like the everlasting, infinite part of you that does not change. Unlike sensory experiences, it's always in you and it's always with you. Now, the thing is that sense experience is quite easily perceivable for us. Sense experience is very explicit, especially all the sense experiences that we like to cultivate here in the modern world, like flashing TVs and like bright clothes and cars and social media, pew, 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 pew. It's fighting for your attention all the time. And so when all that stuff is flying, you can't see inwards to the subtlest parts of you, which are not so seeable. So they're not so easily noticeable. But the thing is, they're quietly abiding, and the self quietly abides in the secret corners of your heart and is always there. And so basically the entire Bhagavad Gita is teaching us how we can turn inwards to that self so that it will be ultimately infinitely satisfying. There's a verse: when the mind pauses, suspended by the attentive practice of yoga, when indeed the Atman is beheld by the Atman, one is completely satisfied by the Atman. So when you turn your consciousness, your awareness, which is permeated by your consciousness, in towards yourself, and not just the outer elements of yourself, and not just your personality, and not just your breath, but something else that's deeper inside there, which is perceivable if you practice, then you start to feel what is infinite. And that might seem very esoteric, like how did Emma suddenly go to this like crazy, like far away, seemingly inaccessible place? Yeah, maybe, but like that's something that can be practiced over time, and I'm working on it. But more than that, here's the practical tool. We walk around life and our brain throws up painful memories or things that make you go, little feelings that are just not nice, suffering. And so I'm going through some things like that at the moment. And when I get those thoughts that come in, my practice is this: I bring my attention back and I feel the texture and the sensations of the breath in my body. And I remind myself that I'm actually here. And I notice where I am. I try to take off like the habitual gaze, like especially if it's in a room that I'm in all the time, or even if it's in a place where I have a lot of ideas about the space that I'm in, or maybe judgments about the space that I'm in. I try to remove that and pretend like I'm a tourist on holiday and I'm like seeing something for the first time and seeing myself for the first time. And I allow myself to be like, here I am. And suddenly there's a sense of spaciousness. Practically speaking, the nervous system is calmed down when you link your attention and your breath. But, spiritually and psychologically speaking, I'm reminding myself that I don't have to carry around the pain from my past. I can, in fact, let go of that. And this is the practice of yoga. Reminding yourself that you are here. Reminding yourself that the stuff that you brought with you can be left behind. And just seeing what it feels like to create that space. As it says in the Yoga Sutras, the suffering that is yet to come can be avoided. In chapter 2, verse 16. And you can do that. Life doesn't have to be suffering. This is the funny thing, is that it says, the yoga tradition says, life is suffering, but it doesn't have to be. And it gives us so many beautiful tools. And it seems so simple. Just turn towards yourself. But the thing is, when you start to turn towards yourself, you have to kind of wade through all the crap, forgive my French, But when you do wade through all of that, suddenly at the center of it, there's something luminous and amazing. And that is the infinite part of you, which is already complete, which is enough. And this is what they say when yoga people say, you are enough. That's what it means. It's going against this capitalistic notion of always having to do more, always having to try and fill the sadness with a better job, a faster car, more money. You've got everything you need already. So why say anything more? That's it for today. Om Shanti.